All right, welcome back to another episode of the Black Bullion Show. Today we have an interview with Ronnie Stoeferle with Kitco News, and he makes some pretty interesting claims here, and we're going to get into it with some really nice, healthy amounts of data. But before we get into it, please like the video, please subscribe to the channel if you're new, and let's dig right into it. So, Ronnie Stoeferle, and again, you might have actually seen him with Mike Maloney on his channel, Gold Silver. Here's what he says. But from my point of view, it's really obvious that inflation is really around the corner. Because let's face it, we're seeing the most aggressive central bank policies that we have ever seen. But we're not just seeing unprecedented monetary stimulus, but we're also seeing unprecedented fiscal stimulus. And I think this combination, once the economies open up again and velocity or the demand to hold money change, then we should be in inflationary, perhaps even stagflationary environments. Now, whoa. These are huge claims coming from Ronnie. First, he's saying that there's all this money just sloshing around. And then he's also saying, hey, there's going to be stagflation, which to us in the US, we automatically have red flags going up because we think of a bygone era of the 1970s and how that will never happen in this country again. Well, we're wrong because I've actually made this claim myself before on this very channel, saying one of the worst case scenarios that we could have happen in this country is stagflation, but we have some really strong data to back this up, and I'm going to show you that right now. So let's take a look at what we have here. First, we have data that comes straight from the International Monetary Fund. Now, the International Monetary Fund basically is tracking the policy responses to the issue. Now, for those of us who watch this channel, there are some countries here that are probably of more interest to you. But I just want to mention that almost every single country has a policy response, fiscal, monetary, and sometimes otherwise, to address this issue. You have Albania here, Algeria, Angola, Argentina. Again, this is in alphabetical order. But let's go straight down to the U's. You know where we're headed. You know where we're heading. First, we're going to United States. Let's take a look at the fiscal policy. And this is as of April 16th. So far we've had 2.3 trillion, around 11% of GDP addressing this issue. For monetary side of things, the federal funds rate was lowered by 150 basis points to 0 to 0.25 basis points. Now, some of us may already know this who are in the United States. Let's look at our neighbors across the pond in the United Kingdom. Tax and spending measures include additional funding for the NHS, public services, and charities, roughly around 14.7 billion pounds. Measures to support businesses, 27 billion pounds. Monetary side of things, the bank rate was reduced by 65 basis points to 0.1%. And again, this is basically the West. We know, basically throughout this whole tracker, they've got countries all over. United Arab Emirates here. Got Ukraine there, So I'm going to leave all these data points in the comment section or in the description so you guys can check this out yourselves. So let's take a look at the debt to GDP ratio. Now, Ronnie Stoeferle talked about massive or aggressive central bank policies. So let's give them a point. Let's give them a round of applause. We can pretty much agree that every single country seems to be having some kind of fiscal and monetary response. Okay, money sloshing around. But now let's talk about stagflation. So stagflation means there is low growth. Also, there's some high unemployment, but let's just focus on low growth, and there is high inflation. The double whammy there. So here we have a study done by Carmen Reinhardt and Kenneth Rogoff of Harvard University. This study basically shows that once debt to GDP hits 90% and higher, countries tend to have slower growth. So now we're going to be addressing the growth side of things. So let's take a look at their information. Our analysis was based on newly compiled data on 44 countries spanning over 200 years. This amounts to 3,700 annual observations and covers a wide range of political systems, institutions, exchange arrangements, and historic circumstances. So they have a wide set of data here. The main findings of that study are: number one, first, the relationship between government debt and real GDP growth is weak for debt to GDP ratios below 90% of GDP. Above the threshold of 90%, median growth rates fall by 1%, and average growth falls considerably more. The threshold for public debt is similar in advanced and emerging economies and applies for both the post-World War II period and as far back as the data permit, often well into the 1800s. So it's not just the West, it's all over the world where this applies. And during pretty much this whole data set, this whole data range. Number two, emerging markets face lower thresholds for total external debt, public and private, which is usually denominated in a foreign currency. When total external debt reaches 60% of GDP, annual growth declines about 2%. For higher levels, growth rates are roughly cut in half. Third, there is no apparent contemporaneous link between inflation and public debt levels for the advanced countries as a group. But whoa. Take a look at this. Some countries, such as the United States, have experienced higher inflation when debt to GDP is high. So, higher inflation, lower growth are basically a given when debt to GDP is high. So, how does the US's debt to GDP ratio look now? Well, remember, 90% and higher, slower growth. Take a look at this. I'm going to go to the 10-year period. For the last 10 years, we've been at 90% and above. We've essentially had slow growth for 10 years. Now, you may remember, or you may know that on average, we've had roughly around like 2.9% for the last 10 years of growth. Not that great. And let's take a look at when this all began. Let's go to the 25-year period. In 2008, when the crisis hit, we are at 67.7. 2009, we just jumped to 82.3. 2010, we jump again to 91.2, and then things just slowly go up. Now let's take a look and see how far back this goes. Okay, so we have seen higher levels. This is right around World War II. But take a look at this. It was a extreme spike, then it comes back down in an extreme manner as well. But the debt to GDP has been growing slowly for a while now. But take a look at what happened here. There was a huge spike, but unlike what happened after World War II, we just continued to grow slowly. Now, this is what scares me here, just a continued slow growth. Now, this data goes up until 2019. We haven't gotten the 2020 numbers. 2019, we're at 106.9. But there are projections of us hitting 110 in the United States by the end of 2020, which is 20% points higher than what we need to have slow growth. So essentially, we have slow growth, and it's only getting worse with this crisis. So within the US, we run the risk of definitely having a stagflation after this whole thing boils over. Let's take a look at the global side of things. So globally, now this is set up to show all of the countries ranked in debt to GDP from worst to best. So obviously you see Japan here at number one. They've had the number one spot for a while, I'm sure. They're at 237.54%. And we know that they've been having slow growth since the 90s. Number two, not so much a surprise, Venezuela. Number three, not so much a surprise, Sudan. Number four, not so much a surprise, Greece. Number five, look at that, Italy. Now that's scary, knowing what they've been going through recently. They're at 133.43%. Now, of course, can't really say much being from the United States. We're in this group. We're not too far behind. We're at 106.70%. Now, for those of you who watch this channel and who are in other countries, especially Canada and United Kingdom, you're not too far behind. Take a look at this. United Kingdom, you're at 85.67%. Canada, you're at 88.01%. So both of these countries are essentially knocking on the door to slower growth. So let's take a look at the amount of countries in this data set. So we roughly have around 184 countries, or I should say maybe 184 countries, roughly. And out of them, we have 26 that that are 90% debt to GDP or higher. So roughly, that's around roughly. Now I did 26 at 185 there, so I meant to do 184. But out of 185, roughly we have 14%. So nearly a fifth of the globe is in a slow growth environment, which is frightening if you ask me. And of course, the United States is baked into that number, which is again frightening because so many countries are connected with the United States. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think? Do you agree with Ronnie Stoeferle in saying that we might have a stagflationary environment? Based on this information here, I'd say in the United States, there is a risk of that. Of course, there's some other information there that might lead others to say, well, in some other countries, we might not have inflation. True. But for those of us in the United States, we run the risk of having slow growth and high inflation to produce stagflation. And to compound that, we have some aggressive central bank policies. We have some aggressive monetary stimulus and fiscal stimulus kindling to the potential flame. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. Do you think like, oh, wait, black bullion, it's not going to be that bad. You're just throwing a bunch of data in here, and yeah, there's some, some pretty interesting stuff here, but it's not going to be that bad. Take a look at the data before you actually make your comment, and let me know what you think. I'm going to leave it in the description. But before we end this video, I just want to say please like the video before you head out, and please subscribe to the channel if you're new. All right. Thanks again.